Well, speaking of that, a couple of attorney generals decided to push back against censorship in America, specifically coming from the White House and the Biden administration's collusion with the social media apps, and they're winning. They're winning because what happened was that a judge said that the Biden administration, the government, could no longer consult with social media about censoring the free speech of American citizens. And Joe Biden's administration immediately pushed back and is going to court to make sure they can keep censoring you. They're doing this right out in the open. And they've convinced at least half the country that this is the Christian thing to do. That censorship is next to godliness. Censorship is the vaccine of the soul, as Kurt says.
Right. Well, it's true, even though, one classic definition of fascism is a merger of state and corporate power.
That's it.
Right. And that's what this is. We're talking about the social media titans working in collusion with the White House. And of course, they also work in collusion with the Department of Defense and other powerful federal interests. This is fascistic. This is fascistic. And yet they're, as you say, they're doing it. They're doubling down. They feel absolutely righteous about it. And why, right? Because people have been made to believe that what's called disinformation, which is any deviation from the official narrative, they've been persuaded to believe that disinformation kills, right? Now, I mean, defenders of free speech, going back to John Milton, right, hundreds of years ago, have understood that the surest way to defeat a lie is to let the sun shine on it and let people discuss it openly. That's why we have free speech.
So there's a saying, sunshine is the best disinfectant, not censorship. Sunshine. Go ahead.
Not censorship. Exactly.
So go ahead. Right. I interrupted.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, my purpose in teaching the propaganda course was to get students to look into controversial narratives, regardless of what they had been told they should think about them.
Right.
And my view is that, it doesn't matter how sacrosanct the narrative has become. If a student wants to write about Sandy Hook, for example, I say, go right ahead. Look into it. See what you find out. If a student wants to write about, Pizzagate, right? These are things that you're never supposed to bring up. You're never allowed even to think about them. If students wanted to study those, I say, go to it. Welcome. Look into it. See what you find. Because otherwise Kyle
Rittenhouse was a great example of this. So we were told that Kyle Rittenhouse didn't live in that community. We were told that he traveled across state lines with guns and that he shot 3 black people. Like, none of those things were true. He was a member of that community. He was a lifeguard in that community. He lived 20 minutes away from downtown. And he didn't take guns across state lines, and he didn't shoot 3 black people. He shot 3 white people.
Right.
And they called him a white supremacist. And I'm like, well, that's a pretty remedial white supremacist. You shoot 3 white people.
I know. Listen,
but this and that's the propaganda you're talking about. So now you were made to not even look in. If I looked into that case, I was a bad person. Because if you looked into it, you found out what I found out. And then if you said those things publicly, people would say, you're a bad person. You're siding with Kyle Rittenhouse.
I know.
Just by telling the facts of what happened, that's how the media reports everything in this country. And it's because the oligarchy, all they have left is narrative control, because they're not going to provide economic sustenance for our people. They're not going to give you health care. They're not going to give you student debt relief. They're not going to give you free education. They're not going to give you a minimum wage. They're not going to give you relief when you get sick and go bankrupt. They're not going to do anything for you. So all they have left is narrative control. And that's what all this is about. They have to control the narrative. And if they can't control the narrative, it's all over. And so that's why they're doing this. So go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, the game plan seems to be, and I believe that this has been in play since the beginning of COVID. I've talked about the last 3 years as a propaganda masterpiece.
It is.
Kind of rolling thunder of propaganda narratives, one after the other.
Yes.
They're all traumatic. They all play on fear and anger, and they're all profoundly divisive, right? I actually think, now I've written books on election theft. I mean, in fact, that's what got me canceled as a media critic back in 2005. I had been writing op-eds for the New York Times. I had often been on NPR. I was regarded as an edgy but permissible social and media critic. Then I came out with a book about the theft of the 2004 election. And I think it's a very good book, and I think it makes the case. And it's one of several books that have made that case. But it wasn't only the Republicans who regarded that as a forbidden position. The Democrats felt the same. And weirdly enough, the left press attacked my book very, very vehemently as conspiracy theory, right?
Yes, and that is because the left press is owned by the same people who own the right press. So they work for the same people. There is no lefty press in America. Mother Jones is a corporate rag working for the war machine. That's how bad it's gotten. There is no lefty press in America, so that's why you're attacked. We only have right-wing or corporate press. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
That's okay. I'll just, a little bit pedantic on my part. I'm just going to quibble a bit. It isn't, the left press is partly owned, as is Mother Jones. You're absolutely right. But a lot of those outlets are also funded by the Ford and Rockefeller Foundation.
Yeah, establishment.
Well, those are longtime pass-throughs for the CIA.
That's right.
And that's what we're really talking about here. And we might have cut to the chase, Jimmy. The real sin that Bobby Kennedy has committed is to talk openly about the CIA's history as a criminal organization and their involvement in the murder of his uncle and his father. It is a miracle to me that he's out there talking as he is, that he's seriously running for president. I don't agree with every one of his positions. There are some things he has not spoken out about that I wish he would. But that is the core issue, it seems to me, is the fact that this country has, since 1963, basically turned more and more into an oligarchical hellhole, that the military is running wars all over the world, that the intelligence agencies are running rampant. Since Trump was placed in the White House, the CIA and the FBI came to be revered by the left.
Yes. Yes.
How did that happen? This is
propaganda. That's how it happened, by propaganda. Yes. As you know, that's how it happened. There's only 6 companies that control every radio show, television show, every movie that gets made, every newspaper, every magazine. It's controlled by 6 corporations, which means it's a handful of billionaires, which means it's about 15 guys who are controlling everything that happens in this country and our foreign policy also. And that's exactly what this means. The entire media is controlled by a handful of people, and that's thanks to Bill Clinton and the 1996 Telecommunications Act, which took us from 50 giant media companies down to 6. And that's why they can control the propaganda so elegantly now, and why we're allowed to go through something like COVID for 3 years, where it was one lie after another, and anybody who pushed back against it was immediately ostracized and kicked out of the polite society. Even pricks like Noam Chomsky were telling people if you weren't unvaccinated, you should be separated from society. And when asked how they would get food and water, he said that was their problem, and he still hasn't apologized for it, which shows you that Chomsky lacks the character of the same people he's critiqued his whole life. He is one of them. That's how he knows them. So, and I will never, ever forgive Chomsky and for that, and because he's not asking for an apology. That's a real evil that he's committed, and I'm not going to let anybody forget about it because he wants everybody to forget about it. But Chomsky's just as suffers from just the lack of integrity as the people he's critiqued his whole life, it turns out.
Well, that's certainly true. I was as appalled as you are when I saw him say that, and he didn't just say it once.
Right.
I mean, he said it several times. I thought, who is this guy? Now, I want to go into this in a little more depth with you.
Can I just, before we do, let me just cover this really quick, this story, and then we'll get back to that. So I just want to cover this because, so the two attorney generals from Missouri and Louisiana have sued the Biden administration for censoring, and the judge overruled the Biden administration. The Biden administration has officially filed a notice of appeal in the Missouri versus Biden censorship case after a federal judge issued a preliminary injunction order barring government officials from contacting social media companies to suppress lawful speech. So that happened. That's a good thing that that lawyer did that. But look how the New York Times covered it. The New York Times prints a factual misinformation about COVID and the vaccines to go against this, to defend Biden. Here's what they said. They said the judge says government overstepped its efforts to address false claims about COVID-19 vaccines in the 2020 election. That's what the judge said. This is a United States federal judge has blocked officials in the administration of President Joe Biden from contacting social media companies about content moderation. Doherty wrote that the government's attempt to limit false claims related to elections and the COVID-19 pandemic arguably involves the most massive attack against free speech in United States history. So just remember, kids, freedom of speech is a conservative idea. Liberals believe you should have somebody who checks all the words that go in and out of your head like a factory line of tomatoes, picking out the bad ones because they're protecting you, and they're protecting you because they see you as children. That's what's happening here. And the judge is, listen to this. Now, here's an MSNBC, or this is CNN. Watch how they freak out over this. This is amazing.
Is astonishing to me. This is a conservative ideology that clearly comes through in this.
Free speech is a conservative ideology. This is where we are. I grew up, if there was anything I thought I was sure of in my life, is that free speech and anti-censorship was a lefty position that we had to fight against all the time. And I also thought that being anti-war and pro-peace was a lefty position, and being pro-worker was a lefty position. Now with Joe Biden and these new Democrats, free speech is conservative, anti-censorship is conservative, being anti-war is conservative, and being pro-worker is conservative. This is crazy. So this guy's saying that the judge who is making sure that Biden can't censor you anymore, they're saying that's conservative. That's right wing. Here we go. It gets worse.
Decision. It's a conservative political ideology, right? We saw some of the quotes questioning vaccines, questioning masks, conservative talking points. But the ruling itself is the opposite of is astonishing.
Questioning masks is a conservative talking point. So I didn't know that scientists who did all those studies that shows that masking at population level makes zero difference and doesn't stop the spread of a airborne virus. Those were all conservatives who went into science and medicine. That's what this genius at CNN is saying. Anything that goes against the establishment is now white supremacy, Nazi, and conservative. That's what he's telling you. Here we go.
To me, this is a conservative ideology that clearly comes through in this decision. It's a conservative political ideology, right? We saw some of the quotes questioning vaccines, questioning masks, conservative talking points. But the ruling itself is the opposite of judicial conservatism. This is one of the most aggressive, far-reaching rulings you'll ever see. What this judge is purporting to do is to micromanage, really, the day-to-day interactions between essentially the entire executive branch, all these agencies that are listed as defendants, and the leading social media companies. And in the actual temporary injunction, the judge basically says, you're not allowed, administration, to talk to these social media companies about any protected free speech except for cybersecurity threats, national security threats, criminal threats. But where's the line? Who's going to police this? This is a judge trying to
Did you hear what he's saying? Who's going to police people having free speech? That's what the journalist is saying. The person who's supposed to be being the watchdog of the censors. They're supposed to be the watchdog of government. And he's saying, no, the government's supposed to be your watchdog. They're supposed to be making sure you don't say anything out of line that the establishment doesn't like. This is what, and no, they're not embarrassed to say this in public. He's saying it right on camera, and he's saying it indignantly, like, oh my gosh, can you believe that someone is going to stop the president of the United States from censoring individual citizens on social media, from expressing free speech? They're outraged over this. They have it exactly backwards, and this is the typical Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton voter. This is them. Let me just play a little bit more.
There's the day-to-day regular activities of the entire executive branch. I don't know that it's actually policeable by the judge, but it's really an astonishing. I don't mean this necessarily as a criticism. This is a very activist judicial opinion.
Protecting free speech is very activist. So let me bring in Mark Gershman Miller. What would you have any comment on this? How mind blown are you?
How mind blown can you be? I mean, he just got through complaining about the micromanagement of the White House's interactions with social media. That upsets him, that micromanagement. But he wants the entire system to be able to police our behavior in every particular. He wants them to be able to force us to wear masks. He wants them to be able to vaccinate us, up the wazoo as many times as they like. He wants them to be able to lock us down and keep us, our businesses shut if that's what authority rules. So you're absolutely right. He has it completely backwards. And what I'm struck by is not only the shamelessness of his effusion, but his outrage, his zeal. This is not a guy who's following a script. This is a guy who's speaking from the heart.
Yes, they really believe this stuff.
They believe what they're saying. It is exactly like George Orwell's 1984, where all these bureaucrats and workers in the outer party and all these people working at the Ministry of Truth of Winston Smith, they are all ideologues. They are all filled with the ideology of the inner party. It makes no sense. It's completely backwards. It's war is peace. It's freedom is slavery.
Yes.
And they absolutely.
And censorship is liberty. Censorship is liberty. War and peace is peace, and freedom is slavery. That's exactly what's happening here.
Right, and it's the rage. I mean, I recognize this from my own colleagues too, who were really furious at me for not only, questioning official narratives in my own writing, but worse still, urging my students to question official narratives. I mean, this is a course that I guess, as they know, I had no idea until I read their exhibits that they submitted with their motion to dismiss, how long they'd been trading gossip about me in emails. And they submitted a bunch of these emails with their motion. And for years, they have been really angry that I have brought in people who talk about the Kennedy assassination. I have brought in people who talk about vaccine safety. I have brought in people who talk about, the Israel and Palestine, because I believe that this is what higher education should be about. Students should have access to the other sides of the story and not just, blindly follow whatever's been handed them in school all their lives or what's, reinforced by the media. I really didn't understand that my colleagues were enraged by this over the years. And I think they took advantage of this student's tweet to, sort of get their revenge. It's the anger that's troubling to me, it's all around us now, that if you dissent, you are a conspiracy theorist, but that doesn't mean what it did when that phrase was first weaponized by the CIA. The reason why we all use the phrase conspiracy theory today is because in 1967, before which time the phrase rarely came up in the American press, in 1967, the CIA sent all its station chiefs worldwide a memo 1035-960, which explained that the CIA had a concern. The concern was that there were books analyzing and basically demolishing the Warren Report. There were people like Mark Lane, who wrote Rush to Judgment, people who had written books criticizing the official story of the assassination of JFK, and also going around the country lecturing to college students and so on. And even, Jim Garrison, the district attorney of New Orleans, went on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson and, got the studio audience on his side in saying that the Warren Report is not credible. We need a new commission. So the CIA saw this as a threat to their control of that narrative. So they sent out this memo urging their station chiefs to contact all their propaganda assets, all their friends in the media, all their friendly politicians, wherever they may be, and urge them to publish attacks on these conspiracy theorists. And they also, listed some possible talking points that people could use in those attacks. One of them we hear to this day. It is that a conspiracy on such a scale could never have been kept secret. Somebody would have talked by now. We hear this about 9/11. We hear this about JFK. And it goes back to the CIA, Jimmy. This is in the memo.
I love, that's my favorite one. They go, they could never keep that big of a secret. Building 7 happened right on television. They've kept that secret somehow. But guess what? It's no secret. Everybody, again, all you have to do is look with your eyes. And there was a building that wasn't hit by a plane. And by the way, the engineering department at the University of Alaska debunked the claims that fell because of a fire, and it was reported on local news, on ABC News up in Alaska. It didn't get widely reported, right? Because the establishment doesn't want you to know that they did that to Building 7, even though they did. That idea that, they could never get a secret. Look at the lies of COVID. COVID was one big lie. And they suppressed doctors. They suppressed it, and the way they do it is they use suppression. They use character assassination. They discredit you, and there's only 6 companies that own all the media. It's not hard for them to do it, and so that's how they do it. So this idea that somehow you couldn't pull off a biggest conspiracy as COVID or Libya or Afghanistan for 20 years or the Iraq War that killed 1 million people, those are all conspiracies that they pulled off right out in the open and built and also. So it's just that's my favorite one. They couldn't keep that secret. Well, here we are 20 years later, and still nobody knows about Building 7.
Well, right. Well, the Manhattan Project had gone on for years with over 100,000 people, and it was kept completely secret. So that was, that's just false.
Look at the UFOs, how they kept the UFO stuff secret for 100 years.
If people are under military discipline, they're going to keep a secret, right? Mm-hmm. And really, the CDC, few people know this, but it is actually an arm of the military. And we know now from Bobby Kennedy's book,
That's right.
Anthony Fauci, that the DOD, the Department of Defense, has been behind this entire thing from the beginning.
That's right.
So it's actually the same high players who were involved in the Kennedy assassination, right? But speaking of them, I just want to make one point about the 6 corporations. You're absolutely right. The media is concentrated to an unprecedented degree. I was part of a small movement in the 90s that tried to fight this, that tried to warn that if the media becomes completely monolithic and essentially one big corporate entity, that's going to be the end of free speech. Well, it's continued to happen. But as the media has become increasingly dominated by a corporate cartel, it has also tightened its covert relationship with what we call the deep state. Its closeness to the CIA and to the FBI and to the military has intensified. So it is not just the owners, the interlocking corporate boards, the corporate sponsors. It isn't just those entities that call the shots. It's also the CIA, which since the 50s in Operation Mockingbird has, had a kind of an iron grip around the media, even back when it was far less concentrated than it is today, Yeah. And I want to say something about Chomsky along these lines. This, like you, Jimmy, I was a lefty for years. I was anti-war. I was anti-censorship, right? I was in favor of the working class. And I want to add, I believed in integration. And that's another value that the so-called left has now betrayed, because they're down with the segregation of the unvaccinated. And they're also champions of critical race theory, which, an ideology used to, to declare, blacks only graduation ceremonies, blacks only dormitories, right? So all the values of the 60s left have been, junked by what calls itself the left today. The left today is kind of like the far right of 1952.
No doubt. No doubt about it. What did you want to say about Chomsky?
At Chomsky. All right. So I know Chomsky. I used to teach his books. I thought very highly of him. And there were some things he wrote that are, to this day, quite valuable. But there was something about him, even all those years ago, that didn't sit right with me. And as I became more, familiar with the necessary counter narratives of American history, my unease with him has grown. He was completely dismissive, indeed contemptuous, of anyone who argued about the likely conspiracy behind the assassination of John Kennedy. He was contemptuous of that idea. He shrugged it off,
yes.
Which is exactly what the CIA wanted people to do.
That's right.
He was also completely uninterested in the more than likely government assassination of Martin Luther King. He had no interest in that. He was also dismissive of Bush Cheney's election thefts. I had email arguments with him about this, and he's contemptuous of 9/11 truth. He says it doesn't matter, it's not true. He says, the physicists at MIT, my colleagues, don't think there's anything to it. I mean, that's an authoritarian argument, right? Yep. But I can't help but be suspicious of a leading leftist intellectual who would take such denialist positions about some of the most significant state conspiracies of the post-war era, The left has been remiss in looking into those things. And I believe that, in large part, his influence has something to do with that.
100%. 100%. When so now Chomsky's afraid of me. Chomsky will go on anybody's show. He offered to come on my show 12 years ago when I was doing a local NPR, a local public radio show. But now he won't even return my emails because he doesn't want to answer real questions. He also called healthcare candy, and that the people who are advocating for it and organizing for it were children who wanted Medicare for all. He did that too. So Chomsky, there's something not right with Chomsky, and he's super suspect, and he lived long enough now for us to see through him.
Well, yeah, and let me add, this may sound a bit self-serving, but it's highly relevant. You say he won't go on your show?
No, of course not. He won't return my emails anymore.
Yeah, well, he wouldn't sign my petition either.
Ha!
And this is a guy, let's remember, this is a guy who created a big controversy because he wrote the preface to a book by a Holocaust denier in France. This guy, I'm going to botch his name. The Myth of the 20th Century. It's a work of Holocaust denial, and Chomsky wrote the preface to make the point, and it's a good point, that if we believe in free speech, we should entertain any kind of an argument, etc. Right? I agree with that, but I'm a little bit miffed or hurt that he would write the preface to a book like that, but not sign my petition asking NYU to protect my academic freedom.
When the rubber meets the road, Chomsky's not going to be there. He wasn't there when first of all, he's never, to my knowledge, he's never done anything. He's not an activist. He's not an organizer, which he doesn't have to be. He has a role. But when organizers and people did activate and try to get Medicare for all during a deadly pandemic, he discredited them, those activists, and called them children and said Medicare for all is candy. That's what Chomsky said. He sounds like Ted Cruz when he talks like that. And he's got no defense for that. And he won't go anywhere that will ask him that critical question. He loves to be attacked from the right, just like everybody. But if somebody's going to ask him a critical question from the left, which is what I would do, he's going to run and hide like the coward that he is. And not worse than a coward. What he did was evil. That's what he did was evil. And he's not going to apologize for it because deep down, he doesn't care about doing evil shit, which is why he's probably hanging out with Jeffrey Epstein. Maybe the CIA has something on him, and that's why he says all that crazy shit. He's saying crazy shit, and people are giving him passes left and right. I'm not giving him a pass at this show, which is why he'll never answer these questions, ever. He'll never answer these. He got destroyed by two morons on YouTube who asked him a question about forced to vote and Medicare for all. He got destroyed by them. He could two high school dropouts he couldn't handle, and so he knows he's wrong. And when he's wrong, he just ignores it. It's like everybody else. Hey, come see us on tour. We'll be in Baltimore, San Francisco, Huntington Beach, Rosemont, and Chicago, Las Vegas, Salt Lake City, New York City, Pottstown, Pennsylvania, Stamford, Connecticut, and more, and St. Louis. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for all our tickets for all our shows.